What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm your host, Nick Belsky, joined today by Jacob Punturi. We do have the injury report for the Pittsburgh Steelers, which we'll get into in a minute, but the All Steelers Talk injury report reads, Noah Strackbine did not participate due to illness. We're hoping he's back on the stream tomorrow, so I appreciate everybody tuning in and appreciate Jake for jumping on with me today.
Heck yeah. Yeah. Shout out Noah. I mean, hey, keep resting, boss man. We hope you're all right. But yeah, let's get you back up to at least limited participant tomorrow. But in the meantime, I'm happy to step in, happy to chat some Steelers with you, Belsky. Heck yeah, man.
Yeah, the biggest storyline for the Steelers this week is obviously injuries. We'll get into who participated in what capacity at Steelers practice today as they get set for a Week 16 matchup with the Baltimore Ravens. But outside of that, we're going to talk a little bit about the biggest matchups for the Pittsburgh Steelers going into this weekend, whether the players who are injured are participating or not. There are a couple of matchups that we're keying in on as Saturday closes in. And then I'll give my power rankings because Noah, he's keeping his under wraps. We know that's like FBI secret files. So he's going to keep his under wraps. I'm going to share mine. And as we do after every single one of our episodes, we'll close it out with all the listener questions. So let's jump into, first and foremost, the Week 16 injury report for the Pittsburgh Steelers. It's a big one because yesterday, basically nobody practiced. I mean, we had George Pickens taking a couple of individual drills, but technically being limited or being said as a non-participant today. It's a little bit better. George Pickens still technically did not participate according to the Pittsburgh Steelers, but TJ Watt back on the field dealing with an ankle injury in a limited capacity. So too was Larry Ogunjobi. Everybody else remained a full, did not participate. When you saw this come down the pike, how worried are you at this stage, considering we're at Wednesday and now we have TJ at limited, Larry at limited, but everybody else as they did not participate?
It's not the most reassuring injury report for a Wednesday, but I mean, what else are they going to do? I don't think they want to test either of Watt or Pickens too early, and they're not going to tip their hand either way. But I think it was nice to at least see, folks who were in the building today, sharing video of Watt. Looks like he was at least like moving a little bit, putting some pressure on the ankle. So it looks like he's at least testing it a little bit. But I don't feel 100% confident that they're going to have Watt and Pickens both available for this matchup against the Ravens. I don't know. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, and when I look at this, I think the good thing is a lot of these players that are injured are veterans. So a lot of them don't need to take the physical reps as much, not to mention both yesterday's practice and today's practice are technically considered walkthroughs by the Pittsburgh Steelers on their site. So it's not as if they're missing a ton of action when it comes to on-field preparation. It's not like they need a lot of action when it comes to on-field preparation. I mean, we joke on here every single day that Larry Ogunjobi barely practices when he's healthy. So why is it going to be any different whenever he's injured? So at the same time, you look at this and you're saying, okay, it's a short week and then a short week going into next week as well. Having these guys not participate, or at the very least being deemed as not participating, like a George Pickens, like a Deshaun Elliott, which I think is another huge one. It does make me a little concerned for their status on Saturday. Now, one question that we've kind of tossed back and forth here at All Steelers Talk is, how far do you push them? How much do you push these guys to get back for Saturday? Because it is a big game. It's Baltimore Ravens week. You can lock up the AFC North division, and you're seeing a kind of similar situation happening in Kansas City right now. Patrick Mahomes goes down with an ankle injury. They can lock up the number 1 seed with a win, and it seems like they're pushing him to play to get the 1 seed and then take off the rest of the season. Do you think the Steelers should be operating under that same kind of idea, or do you think because they're a little bit in a less, I would say, secure position, especially considering they wouldn't have that bye week, do you think they should be a little bit more cautious with guys like Watt especially?
100% yes. As soon as the injury happened this past game against the Eagles, I wrote an article that came out on Monday morning about how I hope the Steelers are just cautious with TJ Watt because they don't have that much to gain by, going all out over the next couple of weeks. Yes, they need to secure the division. Of course, you want to have home field advantage going into wild card weekend and all that. 100%. I'm not saying don't strategize and go for that. But it's not like in the Chiefs situation, as you mentioned, like they can wrap up the number 1 seed home field advantage throughout the entirety of the playoffs. I don't think that's really, it's not the same situation for the Steelers. So I would much rather have the Steelers. I'd much rather have TJ Watt if I'm the Steelers in the postseason for a wild card weekend at 100%. If that means him, missing time against the Ravens or against the Chiefs on Christmas Day. But, I don't. If you push too hard, I think the worst case scenario is that players get in too quickly, they come back, they rush back because it's a huge rivalry game. It's, everyone wants to contribute, get that AFC North football, and then someone gets hurt worse or an injury is just, continues to linger into the postseason because the Steelers are legit. And I feel like anything that sacrifices that postseason run is probably not worth it right now. So I'm pumping the brakes. I'm saying let's be cautious.
Yeah, I'm in agreement with you there. And especially you look, it's Wednesday already. It's a short week. So technically it's Thursday when it comes to their cycle and their practices. And a lot of these guys not having practiced at all is a bad sign for Sunday. Now, TJ Watt being limited makes me a little bit optimistic about maybe if he gets back and gets fully engaged tomorrow, that maybe he can push it. But again, do you really want him to? Do you really want him to push it and then potentially re-injure or make it more severe? I think that's something you have to look at and say, it's not like if you lose the AFC North. I think you do have to err on the side of caution here, especially if these guys aren't practicing. But, Larry Ogunjobi, getting him back, I think is underrated. A lot of people are going to look at, TJ. A lot of people are going to look at Deshaun Elliott, who is huge. Don't get me wrong. But Larry Ogunjobi is a very pivotal piece to what they could potentially do this weekend specifically against a guy like Lamar Jackson. One of the keys as to why the Steelers have been so successful against Lamar Jackson is their middle of the defensive line can hold up and can push the pocket back on Lamar so it doesn't create rushing lanes. If you get Larry O back, that's going to go a big way to making sure that front stays as good as it can against a potential MVP candidate in Lamar Jackson.
100%. Yeah, and I love that you bring that up with Larry O, because if there really is a game for TJ Watt to miss, it's probably a game against the Ravens, because the defensive game plan that the Steelers bring against the Ravens is one that is able to contain Lamar Jackson. And I think that having, like you said, having your fortified middle of the line, and then you have Herbig and Highsmith and Preston Smith still available, I think that gives you some leverage. So, I think having Larry O back is a big positive for the Steelers going into this Ravens matchup.
So we'll have to wait and see what happens tomorrow. Again, walkthroughs, it's kind of hard to judge where they stand on it. Not to mention, again, all veterans. This would be different if, say, it was, if it was Mason McCormick, or if it was Zach Frazier, or if it was Peyton Wilson. I think then you could look at this and say, well, if they're not practicing, they're not playing, because that's the way Mike Tomlin operates. But with a guy like TJ Watt, with a guy who's been around the block enough, like a Deshaun Elliott, specifically a guy like Larry Ogunjobi, who's on and off the injury report like it's nothing. I think these are players that you kind of have to be patient with, sit back and see what they're going to do throughout the whole week, especially with that designation of, hey, they're just doing walkthroughs, because, at the end of the day, these guys mentally, they know what they need to do, especially in a division matchup where most of these guys have played. I mean, even Deshaun Elliott has played once against the Ravens as a member of the Steelers, but he's no stranger to AFC North matchups, so he knows what to expect, and he knows how to prepare himself.
Well said. Yeah, 100%. I don't think any of these guys need to have a full walkthrough and get everything they need to be ready for Saturday. So, I'm not 100% hanging on to whatever comes out in the injury report. But at this, again, I'm hoping that they just don't push it too far. If everybody's good to go, great. Let's go get a W. But if 95% even, let's just be cautious.
Now, depending on who plays, obviously it changes who could potentially be the biggest matchup. But I do want to talk for a minute here about what we think the biggest matchups are against the Baltimore Ravens, because this is one that we've seen obviously 2 times a year for every year, forever and ever. Amen. We saw it a couple of weeks ago. Steelers get the best of the Baltimore Ravens 18-16 in a game that they didn't need to score a touchdown to beat Lamar Jackson, and at the time, the number 1 scoring offense in the NFL. So Jake, I'll ask you to lead this one off. What is the biggest matchup that you're watching for in Steelers-Ravens Part 2 this Saturday?
Well, I think for me, it's the Steelers' offensive line going up against the front seven of the Baltimore Ravens. The Eagles downright bullied the Steelers' offensive line in that defeat. And, who hasn't gotten pushed around by the Eagles in this 10-game winning streak they're on? Like, they are just, an unbelievable football team right now. So it's not a total indictment of the Steelers' offensive line play, but for a unit that's been encouraging and getting better and giving Najee and Jalen a ton of push at the line of scrimmage and point of contact, they were beat often. I think part of that is just a more experienced unit and a very talented group going against a younger unit in the Steelers' offensive line. This is an opportunity for them to bounce back in a big way in a rivalry game. I think is a great way to sort of put in that built-in momentum and fire that you need to sort of have a bounce back game. So I'm watching them to see if, how Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick and company respond against the Ravens defensive line. And hopefully they can score a touchdown on the back of like some bruising offensive line play.
Yeah, let's be brutally honest here. The Baltimore Ravens front seven torched the Steelers offensive line in that matchup back in week 11. 4 sacks in the first half, and I understand they settled it down. They didn't give up a sack at all in the second half, but Nnamdi Madubuike and Odafe Oweh were teeing off in the first half of that game against Russell Wilson, and you just can't start from that, especially considering the fact that Russell Wilson over the last couple of weeks, I wouldn't say he's been shaky, but he's gotten off to slow starts. You need to protect him early in this game to allow him to kind of get the offense off to a better start, because they can't continue to start off, 3 and out here, 3 and out there. Oh, our defense created a turnover. It's fine. We're just going to kick a field goal. Like, it's great to have a field goal kicker like Boz. It'd be nice if he didn't have to use him as often as he did. So I agree with you. I think this is a massive matchup the Pittsburgh Steelers need to win. I mean, last game against these guys, 74 total rushing yards. The Steelers' rushing game has not been good the last couple of weeks. They're going to need it on the road. You're going to need it. And that's when Mason McCormick is at his best. That's when Zach Frazier is at his best. That's when Broderick Jones is at his best. These guys are great in the run game. Get off the ball, push it down the field, and let some of the pressure be taken off of Russell Wilson's shoulders, because you're actually winning your matchups against, again, listen, you mentioned the Eagles have one of the best defensive fronts in football. Same goes for the Baltimore Ravens. They're still the best rushing defense in the National Football League, and it all starts up front. But the Steelers, if you're going to want to win this one and take the North, it all starts up front for them again. Last week I said there were 4 line units out there. The one unit that didn't show up was the Steelers' offensive line. They need to be those guys this week.
Yeah, 100%. Otherwise, they're going to lose this game, and then, it's going to descend into absolute chaos in terms of the Steelers' postseason chances and their Super Bowl odds. But, I think that the good thing that I've seen out of the Steelers all season, or one of the good things, is that they've been able to show adjustments. And whenever they were getting beat in one way, whether it is, the matchup against the Ravens where they were just kind of getting crushed and Russ was getting taken down left and right, and then they stepped up and made some adjustments in the second half. I'm curious if they were able to isolate certain parts of that second half that worked, and if they're going to implement it, or if it's going to be, another one of those things where the Steelers start slow again, and then have to sort of catch up, follow the strategy, follow the game plan again, and maybe that'll get them back online. But yeah, it's a huge opportunity, and I do think they're up to the challenge. I really do. It's just, these are what good teams are made of. They rise to these really difficult challenges, especially after, adversity like they just went through with that loss to the Eagles.
So I do like this, as this was your obviously biggest matchup here, Steelers O-line versus Ravens D-line. I'm going on the same side of the football for the Steelers. I think it's Russell Wilson versus the Ravens secondary. I mean, I understand the Baltimore Ravens have been much better. Mike Tomlin was glowing about them in his press conference on Monday, saying, they brought in a new coach, and since then they've kind of started to turn the tide. They're still the 31st ranked passing defense in the National Football League, and Russell Wilson, for what it's worth, has had his moments this year where he's been able to torch bad rushing defenses. Or passing defenses, excuse me. Cincinnati Bengals being the prime example. He went out there, threw for 400 plus. Now, do I think he's going to do that in a game against Baltimore? No, it's not the DNA of this rivalry. It just isn't. Nobody's going to go out there and throw for 400 in this rivalry. At least it's not likely to happen. But with the Ravens being as good as they are against the run, like we mentioned, Russell Wilson needs to get it going. George Pickens or not, Russ needs to be the guy that goes out there and says, listen, our defense is missing key players on all three levels. I need to go out there and be much better than I was in the first matchup against the Ravens, push the ball into the end zone, and I need to take over this one and be an AFC North quarterback on the road like he was against the Cincinnati Bengals and like he was against for a lot of that Cleveland Browns game in the Snow Globe on Thursday nights.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think now my biggest question as far as your matchup to watch, Yabelski, is Mike Williams going to be the X factor in terms of that? And every week, I know it's the same question. Like, why do we trade for? Like, why did you bring in this guy if you're not going to use him? But I mean, I think if Pickens, especially if Pickens doesn't play, I think they're going to have to find a way to, throw some moon balls up to Mike Williams.
Yeah, the long ball, the moon ball is a part of the offense. Whether you want it to be the biggest part or not, it is probably the biggest part of the offense. I mean, every once in a while you need to do that to get the defense to stop just run blitzing you and stop playing within the first 10 yards. So you do need to be able to connect on a couple of those. They didn't do that against Philly. I mean, yeah, they had the flea flicker and then immediately lost the momentum after that with the Najee Harris fumble, or I guess technically, according to the official scores, a Russell Wilson fumble, which is hilarious. But you do need that a little bit more frequently this week. And I think that even more importantly than the moon ball, because Russ has it in him. And if you use Mike Williams, he has it in him as well. I mean, he showed it against the Cleveland Browns a week ago. Even more importantly, you need to get those underneath passes and those rhythm passes to connect. Last week, it was tipped ball after tipped ball. They tried to run a couple of play actions, but when the running game wasn't succeeding, Russ still had no time to throw. By the time he turned around, it was whether it was Jalen Carter or somebody else, somebody was right in his face. So the Pittsburgh Steelers, by hook or by crook, they need to get Russell Wilson going, and this needs to be a Russell Wilson game because I don't see the offensive line being able to run the ball down the Ravens' throat successfully for 4 quarters. You're going to need Russell Wilson to be able to step up and make the big plays when the big plays are called upon.
Well said. Well said. I think one other thing I just want to add in there real quick is I think if it's no Pickens, if Mike Williams still isn't doing anything, I'd love to see more targets for Pat Freiermuth. I can't figure out. I feel like every week we could be talking about this as well. Is why aren't they just throwing him 10 targets a game? I just think he could help a ton, especially when you don't have a good wide receiver too. But we'll see.
Yeah, he got 7 last week, which I believe was either at or close to his season high when it comes to targets for Pat Freiermuth. But I mean, this is a guy that scored 4 touchdowns in the Steelers' last 6 games.
Yeah,
they're looking for him, just not every single drive. It's getting to a point where, especially like you mentioned, without George Pickens, he's your number 1 receiving target. And he's the one that's going to be out there because they run a lot of sub packages. Calvin's out there sometimes. Van's out there sometimes. Shoot, Ben Skoranek had a catch last week. Pat Freiermuth is out there more often than a lot of these guys. His snap count is up. You need to utilize him and make sure that they know that every single play you could go to Pat Freiermuth and he could make an impact play, because that's the same thing that you're going to get on the other side with Mark Andrews, with Isaiah Likely. They're always on the field and they're always a threat. If you aren't able to utilize Pat Freiermuth that much, then your threats are sporadic and they can kind of key in on them.
Yep. Yeah, it'll just make it easier for Baltimore. And that's not what you want to do.
Not what you want to do. But let's close out our agenda here today with a power rankings that is a little different. Usually Noah gives his, but as we mentioned, those are in the vault right now. Those are in the vault right now, as we're going to give you our power rankings and kind of discuss where we see the top 5 players on the Pittsburgh Steelers entering week 16. Number 5, a guy we just talked about, I'm going to give it to Pat Freiermuth. I think he's been playing really good football. I think that in small sample sizes, because a lot of the time he's not getting the ball thrown to him. We saw what happens whenever he is a key part of the passing game and of the game plan in Cincinnati, and he was great against Cincinnati. I'd like to see that in more ways. I understand that specific play is not going to be open because that is a schemed play that the Cincinnati can't defend. But you need to find other ways to get Pat Freiermuth the ball in space, let him go to work. I think he's been really good when he's been given the opportunities. Look no further than the only touchdown they scored last week, where it was essentially Russell Wilson saying, hey, listen, I have Darnell Washington, but I'm going to give a jump ball to Pat Freiermuth because I have faith that he's going to come down with it. Might not be the biggest, but he's going to go up there and get it. He's been playing really good football.
Agreed, 100%. I just think they need to keep finding ways to utilize him. And, I'm of the mindset. I'm a huge Freiermuth guy. I was pumped whenever they gave him the extension. So I think he just has a versatility that the Steelers have yet to maximize. And I think, it has a lot to do with how good of a route runner he can be. But also, I think you're talking about those underneath and those quick hitting passes. I think there's a really comfortable safety blanket option in number 88 right there if they wanted to. So, I think he's playing excellent. And I think he's going to be a huge part of this Ravens matchup as well.
Now, number 4 is a guy that didn't even play last week. And honestly, if it wasn't for how good number 3s through 1 was, he could have probably moved up while not playing because of what we saw happen when he was not on the field. So that's Deshaun Elliott. I think he has been extremely, extremely undervalued. We've been singing his praises on this show all year long, but I think around the fan base, he's been extremely undervalued. Second leading tackler on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And number 3 is not even close. It's Minka, like 10 or 12 or 13 tackles behind him. And that's with the game that Minka played last week and Deshaun didn't. I mean, he sets the tone for the Pittsburgh Steelers on the back end, especially in that secondary when it comes to physicality, when it comes to tackling. It comes as no surprise that the one game he misses, the Steelers tackling becomes an issue in the secondary. So I think he's extremely important to the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. And that's why he falls in the same boat, maybe not as drastic, but he falls in the same category as a TJ Watt, as a George Pickens, where it's you want to make sure that you have him in the playoffs. You'd like to have him these last 3 weeks, but if it's at the expense of potentially having him available in the playoffs, you just take your foot off the gas pedal and you take it easy a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. I think Elliott is, arguably the team's best addition from this offseason, as good as Patrick Queen has been as well. Like you said, you can see what happens when he's not in the lineup. It affects Minka. They bring him down into the box, which opens up the secondary in ways that leaves them much more vulnerable to passing attacks. And then, like you said, he sets the tone for tackling and that physicality. I mean, he is just an absolute dog in the trenches. Like, you follow that man because he hits hard and he is relentless. And so, when he's not on the field, there is that, like, the notch is turned down a little bit. That physicality, that edge, that intensity is just a little bit less on the Steelers defense. And I think Elliott brings that and kind of completes it. But they need him back for the playoffs. And if that means him missing, another game or two, then okay, fine with me.
Now, my number 3 here is a guy that it kind of stings to put him at number 3 because it feels like he should be a number 1 player on a team with the way that he's performing. But the Steelers have 2 other guys I got to put ahead of him. It's still a great year for Cam Hayward. I mean, go back 4, 5, 6 months ago, Cam Hayward's not at minicamp. He's saying, I feel like I can still play. There's a lot of people around, not inside the organization, but outside the organization doing a lot of talking saying, man, he wasn't good last year. He was injured. He's old. He doesn't got it anymore. He's got it. He certainly has it this year. In fact, he's probably going to be banging on the door of an all-pro selection this year. Certainly should be in the Pro Bowl conversation and should probably be a top 10 when it comes to Defensive Player of the Year voting. He has been a rock in the middle of the Steelers defense. He's been so good for them, and he continues to just impress. And as Noah always says, age like fine wine. So I'm going with Cam Hayward as my number 3. If by your reaction, I think that you're probably in agreement with me.
Yeah, it's laughable now that, anyone was ever like upset or doubting whether they should extend him or give him a new contract. Like it's just he's just erased any sort of criticism or doubt. The wheels could fall off at any moment. Sure, he's in that very risky age range for an NFL player, but he is just so dang good still. It doesn't even matter. I mean, he is one-arming offensive lineman with blocks while making tackles. He's just incredible. Agreed 100% with you, Belsky.
Yeah, Jalen Carter's trying to keep up with him, but all he's doing is slapping Connor Hayward in the face. And Cam's sitting there just doing it legally at the age of, 12, 13, 14 years older. Cam he's a freak of nature, and it's just so much fun to watch him play this year, especially thinking back to last season and saying, man, they haven't had Cam Hayward, but, obviously it's a big it's a big miss, but Keanu Benton has stepped up, and there was all these conversations of, well, Keanu might be the next guy. He's taken over Cam, and then you see what Cam can do when he's fully healthy for a full season again, and you're just reminded, oh yeah, this is a guy that gets 10 plus sacks from a defensive lineman position. That just doesn't happen constantly and consistently, especially when you're 33, 34, and now probably 35 years old, as he's in his prime still, it almost feels like.
Yeah, he's just different. As good as Keanu Benton is, and that's what you hope your team does, is they draft well and like they bring in replacements and stuff like that. And the Steelers have effectively done that by selecting Keanu Benton last year. The problem is that Cam Hayward is just an all-pro Hall of Famer. Like, so you can't just draft someone who's going to come in and give you the same thing. So there's going to be a drop-off regardless. So I'm amazed by the season he's having. It's incredible for the Steelers.
All right, number 2. This guy is completing side quests. It's not enough to just hit every single field goal you're asked to hit. Now he's deciding, I'm just going to, I'm going to call posting in. That's what we're going to do in Philadelphia, because I'm getting bored with just watching it go straight through the uprights unless I'm kicking it from 80 yards, like his two of his 3 misses are this year. Chris Boswell is money. And again, for a long time, he wasn't on these lists, and people were in the comment section saying, what are you doing? I mean, he's won single-handedly 2 games for the Steelers this year, including an AFC North matchup against the Baltimore Ravens. He's going to be big this weekend, as he always is against the Ravens, and he's been very big for the Steelers all year long. Speaking of a guy that might be on his way to an all-pro selection, that is Chris Boswell, and that is my number 2 Pittsburgh Steeler on my power rankings.
Banks were certainly open against the Eagles on that kick by Boswell. But yeah, I mean, that well deserved. He's closing in on the chat can check me on this, but I think it's like he's maybe like 6 or 7 field goals made away from like the most all time or something like that. Or maybe he's closer. I'm not 100% sure. But he seems to be, the one who's doing a lot of heavy lifting most weeks for the Steelers, especially whenever their offense stalls out. So yeah, if he's not an all-pro selection, NFL's rigged.
Yeah, 100%. And like you mentioned there, he is 2 field goals away from being tied for second, 6 away from David Akers for most field goals made in a season. Akers did that in 2011 with San Francisco. Chris Boswell, just absolute menace to society for other teams right now. He's doing what he can to help the Pittsburgh Steelers, and what he can is most of their offense this year. So Boz is number 2. And then number 1, I think everybody knows where I'm going with this one. Forced fumble last week, which you watch it back on Hard Knocks last night, and you just see him coming in with that right arm. If he's an inch to the left, an inch to the right, that ball probably doesn't come out, or at the very least, it doesn't come out as rapidly as it did to where it became available for the Steelers, where it could have just been Jalen Hurts once again. But TJ Watt is ridiculous. I mean, prime television watching him and Landon Johnson last week just go after it. So it was great. And TJ, obviously you're hoping he gets better. You're hoping that he's able to go, but TJ Watt is still the top player on the Steelers.
100%. Yeah, it's crazy because and I was watching that on Hard Knocks, and the thing that like stuck out to me was it's not just that he like punches as hard as, like Mike Tyson in his prime or something like that whenever he's going for the ball. It's that the placement is so exact. He's like an archer or something with how accurate he is with that punch. Other guys, it's become a thing in the league now that people try to emulate, and some are successful. I feel like you see this like more than you used to 5 years ago because of TJ Watt, but like no one does it like he does. And I think it's because everyone just, punches as hard as they can at the football. But TJ Watt times it up in addition to just knocking the absolute lights out of that football. And if he misses, I mean, he's probably bruising down to the bone. So like he's incredible. I hope he gets the rest that he needs. And if he's 100% great, but caution.
Yeah. You definitely, I mean, you saw what happened when you didn't have him last year. I understand that the Steelers came close at times in that game against the Buffalo Bills, but imagine if you would have had TJ, you could have pulled off the upset. And I realized, and I appreciate you for not calling me out on it. I said Landon Johnson instead of Lane Johnson, but I was, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson. They're similar names.
Yeah, we knew who you meant, and poor Lane Johnson. I hope someone's rescued him from that island that the Eagles left him on last week. But Oof.
Yeah, it was a rough week for him. I mean, he won a couple of matchups, but as everybody's saying, he was doing a little bit of grabbing here and there, but I think that's nothing new for TJ Watt whenever he gets into a matchup. But that's all for our agenda. What we're going to do here is what we do at the end of every single episode of All Steelers Talk. We're going to answer all of your questions. So if you're tuned in live, make sure you drop your questions into the chat. Both me and Jacob will be answering as many as we can before we head out of here today. Let's kick things off with, honestly, let's kick it off with this one from Carl Spackler, who says, "Hey, Nick, since Jacob is new, at least new to the audience, I request he provide us his Steelers Mount Rushmore."
Ooh, Carl, great question. Okay. Mean Joe Green, of course. Oh man, this is a tough one on the spot. All right, Mean Joe Green for sure. Rod Woodson, Troy Polamalu, and Franco Harris.
That's a little bit of a different flavor there. I mean, Franco, a lot of people love Franco. Not a lot of people putting him on the Mount Rushmore, even though one of the most iconic plays in football history. But I like it. I like the little bit of flair in there. So
definitely not the four best players, to ever put on a Steelers uniform, but probably the four most important, at least for this Yinzer.
Let's jump over to Robert Garcia, who says, "How many of these players do you think will be back for the playoffs?"
I think all of them.
I would think most of them. I mean, these guys. I mean, GP practicing in week 16, you're going to play in the playoffs. And I think what we're talking about, especially earlier in this episode, when we're saying, do you push TJ or do you play conservative? You need to be at 90% to let him even go out on the field. In the playoffs, for a lot of these guys, it's like, am I 70% good? All right, yeah, cool. I'm going to go out on the field. So I think that we're 3 weeks away. A lot of these players are kind of knocking on the door. So most of the players that you see on the injury report, probably good to go. And I would say the ones that you don't see that everybody likes to ask about, the Roman Wilsons, the Troy Faltanus, less likely. Like, unless something drastic changes. Like, we got a report last week about Cole Holcomb and somebody saying, oh, he might be back. And that's when you start to put your feelers up. But again, Cole Holcomb, there's been nothing new since then. So you probably aren't going to see him come back. So I would say the ones that you're seeing on the injury report, the ones that Mike Tomlin kind of outlined on Monday as leaving the light on for them in week 16, I would imagine most of them, unless they get re-injured, are going to be good to come back for the playoffs.
Yeah, agreed.
Let's jump over to Broderick Wallace, who says, "Are we better off with Justin Fields at quarterback without George Pickens in the lineup?"
No. No, I don't think so. I think Justin Fields should probably be utilized more. And I think that they worked on all these packages for him all season long, and they spent all this time trying to get him involved. But I think they could use him more on the field. But no, I still think Russell Wilson, even without George Pickens, is just a better game manager and better at moving the ball downfield than Justin Fields is. But yeah, I think they should just be using him more because he just scares the defense and he provides this change of pace. I mean, he iced the Ravens in their last matchup with that QB sneak. So I'd like to see a little bit more of him, but no, I still think Russ should be under center.
Yeah, the one player we didn't mention in the injury report was Justin Fields. Did not practice again with that abdominal issue. I don't think you're going to see him this weekend. And certainly, yes, without George Pickens, you're more inclined to lean on the running game. And yes, the running game is helped out whenever you have a guy as dynamic as Justin Fields. But I think that there's also more of me that says, well, if you don't have George Pickens, you need somebody who's going to be able to throw wide receivers open. I don't think Justin showed the ability to do that earlier in the season as much as we've seen Russell Wilson be able to do that later in the season, right? Van Jefferson is not a wide receiver that creates a lot of separation. And yet Van Jefferson has multiple touchdown catches since Russell Wilson became the starting quarterback versus none when Justin Fields was the starting quarterback. I think that's something that you see a little bit more often with Russ. And I think that's why you're probably better off with Russ, because he can actually still provide a passing attack whenever you don't have that number one wide receiver. Whereas I think Justin at this stage, it's still going to be a little bit harder for him to be able to do that. Not to say I don't like Justin. I love Justin Fields, but I think that Russ does provide a little bit more in that sense whenever you're missing your top target.
Agreed. Yeah, and I do expect Kyle Allen to be the backup against the Ravens based off of Fields just not being around this week. But we'll see.
Hey, Kyle Allen, 1 of 1 on the season.
He's the man.
Hard to go against him. Broderick has another one here who says, I'm curious, who are the Steelers' top offensive threats besides George Pickens?
I think Freiermuth, who we spent a ton of time talking about on this episode, I think he's probably the most versatile. I think he's the one who can win the most amount of matchups because you don't want a linebacker playing on him. He's a matchup problem for a safety a lot of times too. So I think he gives defenses the biggest challenge. And then I think besides that, it's Najee, especially with, I know he hasn't, the running game's been kind of, in a downward spiral for the last couple of weeks, but I mean, Najee's still having a great year statistically. And he's still trying to earn another contract in the NFL. So he's bringing a lot to the table here. So yeah, I think Najee and Freiermuth are probably my two biggest picks.
Yeah, I'd throw Calvin Austin in there, but again, it's the same thing as Freiermuth. Is I wish they'd utilized him in a little bit more creative ways. They did last week. The flea flicker was good. He got open, and honestly, I look at that and I'm like, I understand it's a flea flicker. I understand time is of the essence when you're taking so much time to set it up. But man, if Russ could have hit him in stride, he was gone. He had him beat. He was behind the defender there. So if he didn't have to come back for it, he's probably in the end zone. But no, I think Calvin is a guy that has a very unique skill set on this team. And I think that they could utilize it in different ways, but they haven't. And the ways they've utilized it, listen, he's been good this year. He's made some very big plays for the Steelers, but I think there's still more to come when it comes to Calvin Austin. So I'll put him up in that group as well. Maybe as a 1B, but I'll put him up and give him some love in that as well.
Good addition.
Let's go over to Freedom Fries, who says, question, I love this new quarterback. I think we're talking about Russ there. Are you guys excited about him long-term, so beyond the season?
No, I'm not. I don't know how the rest of Steelers Nation feels about this, but I mean, I think this is kind of a one and done situation for Russ, regardless of outcome on the season. And if it's not, that does not make me excited at all. I really don't want to go through another 3 years of the Steelers deciding whether their 35 or older quarterback is still their starter. While they should probably be pursuing a younger option through the draft. So yeah, I'm not excited about Russ staying around long-term if it means they don't pursue one in the draft, either in 25 or in 26. But I mean, for the rest of the season, love him.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, he's kind of earned that grace that he doesn't need to have the questions this year, but at the same time, I think you need to kind of take note of what's happening in Atlanta, specifically today. I mean, they went out and got Kirk, and they knew he was coming back off of an Achilles injury. It might not be great, but he was very good for a stretch this season. I mean, you look at what he did up until week 9. They were 6-3. They were playing really good ball. They had to win a couple of shootouts in division play against the Tampa Bay Bucks, but they did that. He was really good against the Cowboys in prime time, and you thought, all right, things are looking good. And now here we are in week 16. They're a game out of the division lead, and they're turning to Michael Penix. So you have to have that heir apparent. So I agree with you. If you're going to ride it with Russ, because not all situations are the same, if you're going to ride it with Russ, you need that heir apparent. It would be great if it was Justin. It would be. Yeah. But I just think he's going to get an opportunity somewhere else, and he's not going to want to stick around to be a backup for potentially another 2 years if Russ continues to perform well.
Yep, 100% agree.
Let's go over to James, who says, I came in late. What is all this Deontay Johnson mumbo jumbo? I don't know if you saw this, but yesterday we got into Overreaction Tuesday with me and Noah, of course. And one of the overreactions was, well, the Ravens are essentially saying, you know what, Deontay, you're not suspended, but you just take the week off. You just relax at home. The overreaction question was, are the Ravens not cutting him for fear of the Steelers claiming or picking him up or signing him for the rest of the season? And we got real deep into the conspiracy theory with that. So do you think there is any truth to that conspiracy theory?
Oh, yeah, 100%. Yeah, I have no idea. And I have no sources within the Ravens or anything like that to confirm anything even close to that. But purely speculation, yeah, 100%. I think it would make a ton of sense. especially if we're getting into like the overreactions, conspiracy stuff, for the Ravens to just like withhold a player and not cut him whenever they know he could go to the team that they're playing against. I don't think that that's like a real fear, especially when the Ravens coaching staff is in like the middle of like game planning for the week. They're focused on trying to win the division, stuff like that, like trying to put myself in their shoes. But like, yeah, I think that there is some like pettiness involved in the NFL that where maybe if the Ravens they want to cut ties with Deontay Johnson and they already know that, but they are strategically not going to let him go until it's the most optimal time, which for them would mean that he can't like help another team either beat them or go into the playoffs. So I think it could happen. Yeah, I would be absolutely shocked if the Steelers brought back Deontay Johnson at all if the Ravens cut him. It just seemed like that like breakup was anything but amicable. I'm not sure they want to bring him back less than a year later.
Yeah, especially whenever, obviously, again, this was not corroborated by the Pittsburgh Steelers in and of itself, but it seemed like a character move. It seemed like a locker room move. Would you really want to bring somebody directly back into that, especially after the way that he's been dispatched from a Panthers team now and now potentially the Ravens team? But X Concepts has another question that kind of leads off of this. It says, is this actually hurting the Ravens? Is it hurting their roster, their locker room, by keeping Deontay Johnson as a hostage, essentially, just to prevent him from going to a competitor?
No. I mean, I don't think so at all. I mean, I like if Johnson was like a huge part of their offense already going into these games, then sure, yeah. But I mean, the Ravens' top 4 receiving options are not named Deontay Johnson and have not been named Deontay Johnson for the entirety of this season. So I don't think he's even factored into their game plan. I guess it could hurt their team in the sense of like distractions aren't ideal going into a rivalry week, but I don't think the players really have any thoughts about it. It's probably just in one ear and out the other. Yeah. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be a huge impact, but I do think it's a really fun story to like kind of monitor.
Yeah, this is a guy that hasn't really, I mean, he has 2 catches since joining the Baltimore Ravens. I feel like this is a moment where it's like out of sight, out of mind for them. I don't think anybody in the locker room, I mean, he was only there for like 6 weeks. It's not like this is a guy that's been with them through training camp and the summer stuff. This is a guy that came in 6 weeks ago, clearly did not fit well, and is gone. So I don't think it's hurting them at all to just have him on the back burner and tell him, hey, you could just sit this one out, pal. We'll be fine without you and your 1 target and 5 yards that you've brought over the past 5 weeks.
Yeah. In my mind, I'm just kind of hoping that like he got into another locker room fight with the quarterback in Baltimore, and that's why he's not there. That's good. Like, it's just like, I just kind of hope so, just because I think that would be kind of awesome if he just had a reputation of just fighting quarterbacks.
Yeah, he's the next matchup for Jake Paul. That's what he's trying to do, trying to line that up for his post-playing career.
Him and Mark Gastineau are just taking out quarterbacks left and right on a revenge tour.
Jesus. Yeah. So, I mean, no, you're good. You're good. I just like, it's hard to believe that Deontay Johnson went from a bona fide number 2 receiver to a guy that even the Baltimore Ravens and Lamar Jackson can't get anything out of. And just, I don't know. It's strange. It's a very strange situation there. Let's go over to Freedom Fries, who says, what's wrong with Roman Wilson? He has an ankle injury. He was placed on injured reserve before the bye week, and they haven't provided any updates. So you'd have to assume that his ankle is still bothering him, or it's to the point now where they're just saying, listen, you're a rookie. Take the red shirt. Sorry. Like, you haven't been healthy other than 5 snaps against the Las Vegas Raiders. Did a pretty decent job. I mean, one of his plays in there, he run blocked, and it turned into like a 15+ yard gain. But at the end of the day, it's just a red shirt year for Roman Wilson. He's still on the injury list, and he's still injured.
Yeah, I think it's a great term for it, Belsky, because he's just not going to come back, and there's been just nothing about him for the rest of like, I don't even know the last time I heard an update about him. So yeah, I mean, it's just tough, and you just hope maybe there's more, sort of structural damage to the ankle, or like, whatever has been bothering him, that they just think rest and, recuperation is the best course of action moving forward for him. But I mean, yeah, it does feel weird that there's just been like
nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's strange. I mean, at the same time, when a player's not coming close to getting back to practice, like we didn't hear anything about Cole Holcomb. Everybody asked in training camp, and it was like, oh, no update through. I mean, even before that, people were asking from day one of OTAs and mini camp. They're like, anything on Cole? No, nothing. He's in the building. He's rehabbing. That's all we can say. And eventually people stopped asking because there was no updates. And then we get that little surprise update a week ago, 2 weeks ago, whatever it was. And again, back to nothing because nothing came of it. He didn't start practicing again. He didn't join teams. He didn't do individual drills. He's still working and rehabbing on his own. And obviously you'd like him to come back, and you'd like all of these players to come back, but just with Roman Wilson specifically, it feels more likely than not whenever Mike Tomlin continued to harp. It's hard for a rookie to get on a moving train. It's hard to believe that he's going to get on a moving train in week 17 when he has 5 snaps of experience over the last 5 months.
Yeah. I think we should just I think we'll just have to look forward to him making a bigger impact, or trying to make a bigger impact as a sophomore in the league.
Yep. Let's go over to Captain Underpants Elite username here. Says, when, not if, when the Steelers win the Super Bowl this year, do you think we lose any veterans?
Yeah. Yes. If the Steelers won a Super Bowl this year, I think Russell Wilson's gone, probably not going to play football anymore. I think it's very clear he wants to win another Super Bowl. I know he says he wants to play longer, but I feel like the championship is like the thing for him right now. Yeah. So I think if he got it, he could sail off into the sunset and just be him, and his incredible wife and family could just have a wonderful rest of their lives. But I do think he would leave because he could just get a massive deal with someone else if he wanted to continue playing as well. But besides that, I think championships impose a tax on teams that is just really hard to overcome. Everybody becomes much more valuable whenever you win a championship and you're a member of a championship team. I think that if they do win the Super Bowl this year, they'd have a very different roster makeup. But I'm not, Belsky, how many actual vets are expiring their contracts this year?
There's not very many, right? The one name that comes out of mind to me, and sorry if you said this, I was trying to look up an answer to a different question for one of our listeners here. Dan Moore, gone.
Yeah.
Like Dan Moore's already probably like 1 foot out the door because he's going to make a lot of money. And the Steelers, when you draft 2 tackles in the first round back-to-back years, you're not going to pay a lot of money to that other tackle that's already been here. So I think Dan Moore would be gone. I think Najee, because you'd have to imagine he'd have a tremendous playoffs if the Steelers were to go on that run. I think Najee would probably sign for more than the Steelers are willing to pay. So I think you're losing a couple of those guys, but I mean,
is Jackson in the final year of his deal, or is it like an option for him after?
Let me look that up for you real quick. I believe he's in his final year. Yeah. 1 year, $6 million. So Dante Jackson would be another name that you'd be, I mean, I would re-sign Dante. I think it's worth re-signing Dante unless he's trying to ask for something astronomical, because I think he's added a lot to the Steelers secondary. And I think he fits well as a number 2 next to Joey Porter, because I think both of them are obviously different. Dante's the speed, Joey's the physicality, but they're both good man corners. And that's what I think they need. And it's not easy to find that.
Yeah. Yeah. I like Dante Jackson a lot. I hope they find a way to bring him back. But I think the question is like, how much could he command on the open market, and do the Steelers even want to touch that? Exactly. But they like having, the interceptions don't lie. He can match up man on man.
Yeah, let's go over to Chuck, who says, what about a brace like what Justin Herbert wore for his game last week for TJ? It's a huge game on Saturday that has major playoff implications. You could add the brace. I think that no matter what, if it's pain management, I'm not concerned about it, because I think TJ is a Wolverine. I think he has weird blood where he heals fast and he doesn't feel pain. So if it's pain management, sure. Re-injury is the biggest issue. And I'm not sure, if it's a low ankle sprain, which is what is being reported, I'm not sure the brace at his position specifically, where you're torquing on that outside foot, because that's what it is. It's his outside foot when he rushes. When you're putting so much torque on that and putting so much pressure on that, I'm not sure the brace is going to be enough to hold up if it's not structurally good enough to go without it.
Yeah. I guess that is the biggest question too. Is like what structurally what's at risk with that? Like if it is that big of a risk for him to be doing it, then I don't think they'll even play him. Mm-hmm. But if it is just like, he he just rolled his ankle and it just hurts, then yeah, I'm sure TJ's up for whatever to just sort of like make it a little bit easier so he can play. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know what that would do for a lower ankle sprain. Yeah. I'll check my English degree.
Let's go to James real quick because he's keeping me honest. TJ's a Badger, not a Wolverine. Should know that. I should know that.
It's true. It's true.
Appreciate that, James. Let's go to Ricky. Got a couple more here. Ricky says, what do you think about involving Najee in the pass game more? That's kind of what he specialized in at Bama, and we've seen it time and time again where he gets into open space and he embarrasses people.
Yeah, I'm all for it. Again, I think especially if Pickens is not going to be in the lineup against the Ravens, I think spreading the ball out to more of their playmakers is just like a simple solution. And I think getting, Najee in space, if they're very keen on tossing the ball to running backs. Why not, a little bit more screen pass instead of the crack toss? I don't know. But yeah, I would love to see Najee get the ball in space so he can try to get some one-on-one matchups. But I think the problem is when they want to get into those more passing sets and formations, they normally defer to Warren. So I'm not sure if they have a different game plan in place for the Ravens this week.
Yeah, the one thing I will say is a lot of the times where we've seen them try to go to screen passes, for some reason, somebody misses a block and they just can't ever. They've once or twice this year, they've been able to get it. And the one that I remember the most is there's two. I believe there was one in Las Vegas where Najee went off and then it looked like he got injured. He came up hobbling, but he was fine. And then one against the New York Jets where he took it 60 yards. And it changed the kind of complexity of the game. That was one of those plays that kind of got Russell Wilson going outside of the moon ball to Pickens. So, yeah, I think if you can do it and you can block it well, then why not utilize it? But I think there's a reason that they're not, and I think it's because they're not the best at blocking off screens. But let's go to Brimstone real quick, who says, how long are we in the playoffs if we lose out? So let's just say they do lose out. They're 100% going to be a wild card team. There's no way that, well, first of all, Baltimore would get the win this week, and then probably have they would have the tiebreaker if the Steelers lose out. So you would be a wild card team. You'd go to either Buffalo, Houston, or Baltimore. Do you have faith in the Steelers winning on the road against one of those teams to begin with?
Not Buffalo. That's for sure. Yeah, I think the Ravens, sure, I do have confidence in them. The Texans, more faith in them to get a win going to Houston than going to Buffalo. But if they do lose out, they're going to make it very, very tough on themselves to do that because they'll just have to go into some really, really difficult places to win. So yeah, I think losing out is not ideal. And I think realistically, they probably lose wild card weekend if they lose out the rest of the way.
I think there's still a chance that they can go into Houston and get a win. And I would say I'm never going to count them out. I should say, not always, never going to count them out on the road in Baltimore. Beyond that, I don't think you're going much further. If you pull one of those off, you're probably playing at Kansas City. And then if you somehow miraculously pull that off, you're probably playing at Buffalo. You just make the trip and the route so much harder, especially if you have to go on the road all 3 weeks. So let's go to Unlimited Moonballs, who says, Nick, I got another work debate for you. Better wide receiver core, the Pittsburgh Steelers or the Baltimore Ravens? The one thing I want to know is this the Steelers wide receiver core with George Pickens? Because without George Pickens, I'm hard pressed to find a wide receiver core that I wouldn't take over them.
Yeah. Even with George Pickens, I'm like, unlimited. That is a tough question. With Pickens, I think it's a slight edge for the Steelers. But man, Zay Flowers and
Van Jefferson, is that the matchup? Is that terrible?
Rashad Bateman and Calvin Austin, the Steelers, I think, do have a better wide receiver core, and I think if you put them down on paper, they're more productive in Pittsburgh than in Baltimore this season. But I think it's closer than maybe Steelers Nation wants to think.
Yeah. I would probably take the Ravens because right now, are you telling me you wouldn't want Rashad Bateman to be your number two? I would. I think if George is healthy, George is the better number one between him and Zay Flowers.
Yeah.
But I think beyond that, I mean, you're looking at Mark Andrews versus Pat Freiermuth. Andrews, when healthy, probably a step above. If not, that's close, but I think I'd still give the advantage to Andrews. Yeah. Isaiah Likely versus Darnell. I'm probably going Isaiah Likely. So I think that without George, undoubtedly the Ravens. With George, it's close, but I probably still skew Ravens because of quantity and the quality of that quantity versus the Steelers, where it's, Van Jefferson, he pitches in when he can. Scotty Miller, he pitches in when he can. And sometimes the sum needs to be greater than all the individuals. And I think the Steelers can do that at times, but I think not enough with the talent that they've been given this year.
I can't argue against, like, they're just not, the Steelers wide receiver core just isn't that good. They're not worth arguing for. So fair enough.
Let's close it out with this one from Sajan, who says, say we do lose those vets after winning the Super Bowl, and one of them just happens to be Russell Wilson. Do you re-sign Fields or draft a QB? I say both. I think if Wilson is not here, I think the door is open, and I think Fields would want to walk through the door of coming back to Pittsburgh. I think you bring Fields back. You don't draft a QB in the first round, but you still, I think, need another QB, another option potentially for the future. Maybe somebody who's more of a, we've seen in the 7th round the last couple of years, a couple of very talented yet very underdeveloped arms. Joe Milton last year from Tennessee. There's always those types of players. Maybe I'm trying to think of his name. Dart out of Ole Miss, Jackson. Maybe that's the type of player, if he falls, that you look into. So I think there's always going to be options late in the draft, but if Russ is gone, bring back Justin. And draft a late QB and then start working on him and hoping that he develops into something. Or Justin just takes off and you can just kind of cut bait and say, all right, we just need an experienced vet because Justin's the next guy.
Yeah, I think Justin Fields would want to come back, especially if Russ isn't here. And I do think if Wilson leaves, the Steelers are going to they're going to do what they can to get Fields back because he knows the offense. And I think Tomlin would trust him more to come in and, be able to do something similar in 25 rather than going out and getting a rookie and having to fully integrate him into the Steelers offense. But again, I think they need to start making that investment either way. But I think if Russ is not an option, Fields is probably the number one guy in Pittsburgh next year, plus some rookie out of the NCAA.
And this could be a one-word answer: Fields, or if he's available, Sam Darnold.
Darnold
over Fields? You just want that reliability out of the pocket?
I'd choose a pocket passer. I just think it works better for Tomlin's offense than the athleticism that Fields provides. Like, they haven't found a way to, win with, they won 4 out of 6 games with him, but I think over a season they saw that they could not sustain what they've done. But with Darnold, they can do something similar that they do with Wilson, which is just kind of dink and dunk sometimes.
I have to keep reminding myself that Sam Darnold is 12-2 and sniffing down a first round bye in the NFC over the Lions, over the Eagles. Like, Sam Darnold's Minnesota Vikings are right there. So you gotta put some respect on Sam Darnold's name because he's certainly earning it this year. But that's going to do it for this episode of All Steelers Talk. Thank you to Jake again for stepping in. Wishing all the best for Noah, hoping he's getting healthy, but appreciate everybody for tuning in and appreciate the Pittsburgh Steelers for giving us plenty to talk about in Week 16 as they set up to go up against the Baltimore Ravens. That's going to be it for this one. We'll see you guys next time.